Welcome to the Shine Freely podcast. I'm your host, Vicki Reeves. I host conversations with people who are authentic, bold, and kind. Through their life experience, ideas, and research, I'm learning how to shine freely. And in case anything I learn is useful for you, I want to share my experience along the way. All right. Meredith, thanks for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me, Vicki. I appreciate it.
I would love for you to start by introducing yourself.
Sure. So my name's Meredith. I'm an Atlanta-based artist, mad scientist, photographic renegade. I'm also a podcast host, an author, and I recently just completed an augmented reality interactive book highlighting how I healed myself from endometriosis. It's called Face Your Shit, Heal Yourself, which I'm sure we'll get into.
Sounds like you do a little bit of everything.
Yeah, well, it's all in the realms of, taking what's buried inside and then revealing that and transcending it and sharing with others what's been revealed for myself.
God, you're speaking to my heart. Okay, so to start off with, one of the things that immediately caught my attention about your life experience is the immense amount of pain that you've lived through. So can you just start by telling us a little bit about what kind of pain you've been through?
Sure. So pain and I have definitely become friends. We're not friends always. Let me just say, pain is a messenger, and I think it always has a message for you. So it's kind of like, don't shoot the messenger. It's never comfortable, but it's a very loyal message. It's what you need to hear.
Wow.
You know what I mean?
So well said.
Yeah. It's similar to like anger. Like those two kind of things, I feel like in my experience in my life have gone hand in hand where, and a lot of people don't even let themselves feel mad, but like anger and pain, they're so loyal to you. Like they're telling you where your boundaries have been violated, like what you haven't gotten that you've needed. And that was really revealed to me mainly once I started my menstrual cycle, once I started my period at age 12. And so all I ever knew was pain in every aspect in that kind of area. I was also had sexual trauma around the same time. So it was it was a big just amalgamation of pain, confusion, and without having anything, because as a child, you generally don't have the contrast of like, okay, what feels good down there? Like you're just coming into your sexuality, your body's growing, entering puberty and all of that. So the introduction to that for me was just that horrific pain with my cycle. And it wasn't until I had surgery in my 20s, actually, quite a bit a while later, that I was ever actually formally diagnosed with endometriosis. And that's one of the really sad parts about the disease is that doctors, even back when I was in middle school, I'm 34 now. So back when I was 12 years old and 14 years old and 15 years old, it was really seen as like a psychological condition that doctors, it's still to this day, totally gaslit me saying, this is more of like an emotional issue. This is in your head. It's not biological. But the only way we can actually be sure is if we do this really expensive surgery, very convenient for the Western medicine business model. So it's unfortunate that when I had surgery, it had become so embedded, the endometrium, it became embedded in my pelvic muscle because it had gone undiagnosed and untreated for so long.
Wow.
So, right. And this happens to so many young women and girls, unfortunately, even to this day, because it was never really addressed, and doctors, mainstream Western medicine doctors, just aren't trained in understanding and really educating the client and the patient, and telling them, these are the phases of your cycle. This is like what you should or shouldn't be eating. That's all in like the holistic world, which unfortunately is more alternative and not mainstream. So it took me a long time, took me about 17 years just to actually discover the truth and the facts about how women's hormones work, how we're all basically living on a man's biological clock, which is why we have these issues like estrogen dominance and endometriosis and PCOS and all that other stuff. So it took quite a while, and it really didn't have to.
Wow. So from the age of 12, when you first got your period, you were already experiencing intense pain, and you continued to for 17 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you were basically being told something that, I don't know if this is fair paraphrasing of what you were told, but something that I would think any 12-year-old would interpret to mean it's all their fault.
Correct.
What was it like to be 12 and be told that this intense pain that you're experiencing in your body is your fault?
Yeah, it was really confusing, and it was like living a double life. It was really embarrassing and shameful, and that's why it took a lot of people, like when I first released this series or like I'm healed from endometriosis, a lot of people didn't even know that I had endometriosis, because you really do live a double life. There's the life when you're normal and you're interacting in the world and you're out of bed and socializing and everything's fine. And then there's the endo life where you're dying on the floor, lying in a pool of sweat and blood, and like crossing over to the other side. And like people compare it to The Exorcist. It's insane the amount of pain that endometriosis can cause, because it's still responding hormonally outside the uterine wall. So it's right up there with childbirth and everything else. Extremely, extremely debilitating pain. And then it can also attach to other organs. It's a whole spectrum of how people experience it. But it is a very double life. And part of that too is because of the taboo we have around talking about menstrual cycles, periods, blood, all of that, when every single person on the planet actually came from a woman that had a period. It is because of periods that we exist here. Every single person, men, women, doesn't matter. So it's
curious. They're loyal. They're loyal.
Yeah.
To your word earlier, loyal to life.
Totally. Yeah. I like to say, instead of the birth of a child, your period is a birth of your truth. It is.
Whoa.
It is. Yeah, it's true. It's what's going on in your body right now. It's what's true for you at that moment in time, for that month, for that cycle, for that level of progesterone, estrogen, testosterone. It's all there. Or it would be a child. So it's powerful, and it's, of course, and they know this. So of course it's like, let's not talk about that power. There's so much that women have and periods have, because, could cause some problems.
I so appreciate the way you describe it's like this aspect of truth and the fact that anything that's happening in our body in this moment is happening, and it's true for us. And the more I get in touch with what's happening in my body and what's true for me, the more I'm just flabbergasted by people, particularly in the realm of science, which I have a high degree of respect for science. But for someone like a doctor to sit there and tell me that what I'm experiencing in my body is not true, because the research says something else is true for other people who are not me. I'm just like, what? Are we even talking the same language right now? Like, what is happening?
Yeah.
And I can't imagine being treated that way as a child when you're supposed to trust these people in some kind of position of authority, or these people are supposed to help.
Yeah.
And they're telling you that your own truth is not true.
Yes. And it's, the silver lining of it is that, and it's true for a lot of people, that my trauma of going through all of that is actually led me to my purpose. It's hand in hand. It's the hero's journey. It's the journey a lot of people take that is some kind of like really big challenge or obstacle. And it's because of that we really find and see ourselves for who we really are, that we find freedom, that we find, ourselves, and we can claim that. It's only through, not only, but a lot of the time, it's through trauma. It's through pain. And these things that are looked at as like really negative and bad. It depends on, it depends on your own perspective and awareness level, really. And so I'm not saying like it's all daisies and roses and like go have pain. No, hell no, it sucks. It sucks. But part of like the suckiness is that's like the juice and the richness later on when you realize a bunch of shit and you're on the other side of it. It makes it that rich experience, and it leads you. It's part of the purpose and part of the wisdom.
Everything you're saying resonates so strongly with me. And I'm very curious about the experience of physical pain, because it's not something that I feel like I've had a lot of in my life, or like when I have had it, it somehow just didn't grab my attention. But my emotional pain that I've experienced in life has been so intense that, I mean, and I say this like even for me, childbirth was almost painless physically.
Wow.
And so I'm very curious about physical pain in terms of like, is there any way in which you see it as different from emotional pain?
So it's a great question. I'll say this. I don't think like any pain or any sorrow is necessarily like greater than another. It's because it's all relative to the person experiencing it and their needs and what it means to them, really. I think where it becomes suffering, where pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. Where pain becomes suffering is where we don't listen to it and we judge it as being bad. Like, basically, us freaking out about having pain is what makes it more painful and even worse. Like, it's that resistance to like what's happening to us. And that's one of the things that I learned in dealing with my own pain. Is it was a really cool, one of the first chiropractors I ever saw told me this metaphor, and he said, in regards to pain, from ice to water to air to nothing. And so it was like, so you feel that initial pain, whether it be emotional or physical, and it's like that hard ice. And then you basically surrender to it and you imagine it going to water or something like fluid like that, to air, then to nothing. So it's that like really sat with me. It's a metaphorical kind of way of thinking about it, and a really, really helpful, because it takes something so hard and unmovable and it's actually nothing, but it's all the same thing, but it's just different forms, ice and water and air. So I will say that they're definitely interconnected, emotional and physical pain, because of the aspect of us judging ourselves and saying like, I shouldn't be having this. The like shoulds and shouldn'ts make it so much worse. They definitely play off of each other, but I wouldn't say that, one is necessarily greater. You would definitely need to have some kind of emotional fortitude in order to heal the physical pain. Yeah.
What have you learned? Well, actually, can you maybe describe, like, how did you begin healing your pain?
Another great question.
Well, we all want to know how to do it.
Right? How? It's a journey. Hate saying that because it sounds so cheesy, but it so is. And I wish that I would have enjoyed the journey more. It's not just like one day. There is that one day, and I'll talk about that. But I would say it started because I was forced to. There was one, I didn't want to face it. I was scared of my body. It was scared shitless of my pain. Like when you die every month, it's like, and no one knows what's going on, including you. It's horrible. It's horrific. It's a living hell because you never know when you're just going to get that train's going to come through and just run you over, because I never knew when my period was going to come. Totally out of sync with my body, not understanding my body, and honestly wishing I wasn't even a woman because I didn't understand what that even meant. All I understood that it meant was pain at this point, especially in that area. So, and I think on a larger picture, there's a lot of layers and levels to look at that on. I mean, a lot of women are kind of like, because we live in such a like masculine, production oriented, male dominated kind of world. And that's like, that could be a tangent on a whole other episode, but the masculine and feminine polarities, because there's such an imbalance, a lot of women are ashamed kind of being women because we don't live in a way that celebrates women, that celebrates the feminine polarity of cycles and phases, and the 28-day long circuit battery versus the short circuit everyday testosterone 24-hour battery, which of course we have too, but it's just a much slower, receptive looking in, going inward rather than like what's out. So, oh, hi.
My house is full of animals these days.
I love, so cute. I have 2 cats too.
Thanks.
Yeah. Well, I don't even know where I was. Where was I?
Well, I'm trying not to interrupt you every sentence because everything you're saying is so interesting to me. I want to ask about all of it. So how have you, I guess you mentioned the long cycle that women have, or that the feminine aspect of life has, let's say. How have you used that or embraced that to work with your pain or heal from your pain?
Yeah, so thank you. That was where that's actually how I started healing myself. So there was 1 month, it was so painful, I died like for the last time. It was like, holy crap, like this time I was like actually like really scared I was not even going to come back. So I educated myself. I heard on a podcast some women talking about this book called Woman Code, and later on the same author wrote a book called In the Flow, but the author's name is Alyssa VT. And so at that point I was just grasping for anything, so I got this book, and the book, and many books like this, basically just talks about a woman's cycle and how, at that point I thought, oh, it's just my cycle is my period. No, your cycle is your whole life. In the childbearing or the menstruating years, right before menopause, your cycle is your whole life. It's the 28-day cycle, and it ends, or some people say begins, with menstrual. So there's follicular, where the follicles form, there's ovulatory, there's luteal, and there's menstrual. And it's 28 to 35 days, depending on, everyone has a different length cycle, but we hormonally recharge and our whole bodies reset every 28 days. Because I also did know, which I learned by educating myself, starting with this book and many other resources, that your hormones, it's not just your parts, your labia, your vulva, your vagina, all that's not just the parts your hormones affect. They affect your entire body, your brain, especially your brain, your digestive system, all the organs. They're critical. And I had also, one of the most damaging things that I had done in what they prescribed to girls at the time was, okay, birth control, which it never worked for the pain. But what birth control does is hormonal birth control. It cuts you off from that cycle that I just described. So you're not getting those hormones into the necessary body parts, like the brain isn't going to function. It cuts off ovulation, which I feel is extremely dangerous also for a number of reasons. But talking about mental health, ovulation is where you have that kind of like mental toughness. It is like the unstoppable, like diva kind of phase. But when you cut that off, and this is totally my opinion, and this is from my experience as well, it's like kind of the lights in the room go out. And I was suicidal. And this is very common, not just for me, but I'm sure you all hear the list of long like side effects on every commercial, like may cause death, like so may cause blah, 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 blah. It's real. So that hormone conversation was like hit me the biggest. And the fact that every phase of the month, our brains are primed to do something different. Like, so if you know this information, you can leverage that in your life. So like you can organize your meetings and talking like during ovulation, and you can, have more rest during menstruation. So the men are on that 24-hour, their hormones, testosterone, it's, 9 to 5. Look at our world we live in, where the workforce is 9 to 5. Testosterone highest around 9 in the morning, drops off right there around happy hour. And that's every day. So you can think of the women's cycle as just an extended version of that day. So during that day, they're going through each of these phases, follicular, ovulatory, luteal, and menstrual, just quicker. So it's that yin and yang. It's the same thing, just experienced in a different way. But unless you know that, your body isn't able to get what it needs. And I didn't know that. If I had known it, I would have been eating and living my life very differently. And there's tons of endocrine disruptors and all of, the modern diet. Leaky gut plays a part. There's tons of stuff I'm leaving out. Pelvic floor physical therapy. There's a lot of things that I did, but the educational piece is what really stuck with me and what changed my life when I started honoring my body and not being afraid to face and to say, I need this. Like, it doesn't make it bad, doesn't make you weak. It is just part of what you need and who you are.
How did you find I don't know, maybe courage is the right word, but like, how did you decide to honor yourself?
Yeah.
It's not a natural tendency, which is so bizarre to me. And as far as I can tell, I think every human struggles with it.
Yes, absolutely. And I will say it's not a destination. It's like a stair-step ladder there. There is like that day, and I had that day happen to me where, I looked around the room.
That day?
Yeah. So it was after, I had read the book. I was in the middle. It was in my healing journey, so to speak. I was reading the book. I was applying the methodologies. I had also been seeing a pelvic floor physical therapist, which I highly, highly recommend. Changed my life. So I was dealing with the hormonal part. I was dealing with the muscular part, which is pelvic floor. Bless those women. They're amazing. And then I was also doing sex therapy in a group, which was absolutely found my freedom. And so I hadn't found it yet, but I was doing all the things, and I was like in the trenches, doing this and really looking, cleaning out the shit. And it was my anniversary.
Can I just ask,
Yeah, please.
what is sex therapy?
So sex therapy, it was when sex hurts, basically, was the theme of this type of group. And everyone in there, including me, had pain with sex. And the therapist was leading this kind of group therapy because, and I experienced this in the group, it's such an embarrassing, painful topic that when you know that other people, other women are experiencing it, it adds a whole other layer of healing, of community. I loved it. And I had never done something like that, like a group therapy before. But essentially, you could think of it as like having a therapy session, but with a group of people. And you can get insights from other people that share your issue. And our issue that we shared was pain, excruciating pain with sex. Some, mine was from obviously endo, and the sexual trauma I experienced played a part in that. But it's not only, I learned about a lot of other stuff. It's not always like that. Like we were talking about earlier, it could, a lot of times there are like complete psychological, blocks that cause the pelvic floor to become so hard. The mind and mental health and your emotions, they're hand in hand with physical pain. Yeah.
Okay, so sorry, you were in the sex therapy.
That's okay.
And what happened next?
Yeah. So I was doing all of that, and my anniversary was coming up with my husband. It was 2020 and October. And so we were, going to go to because no one could do anything because it was COVID. So we were going to do like a staycation or something, hotel. And so we got like a nice hotel, and I was sitting there, and for me, previous sex and anything involving that area was like it was like a big mountain to climb. It was like, okay, I gotta get ready. I gotta, did I do this dilator movement right? Like I gotta practice, So I was, going through those motions in my mind and just kind of sitting there and sitting on the bed, and I just had literally like a moment, and the best way I can describe it is, I don't know if anyone has seen The Secret. Have you seen The Secret, the movie?
Wow, a really long time ago. I don't know if I remember it.
It's okay, because there's one part in it. The guy has a son, and the guy put like his dream house on his vision board, put it away, packs it up. 5 years go by. The son finds the vision board with the house on it in a box and takes it to the dad, and he's like, "What's this?" And the dad sits and he cries because he's like, "Holy shit, I finally get it. I'm living in the house that was on that board, and I hadn't even realized it because we're just so in the future of like, what's the next thing that needs to be done? We never like being here now to actually enjoy what has happened." And so I say that because that's exactly what happened to me. Sitting there in that room, I didn't even realize. Like, I was like, holy crap, Meredith, you're sitting here like about to have sex, like something you've feared. Like, it's been such a big hurdle, all this other stuff that's like so casual, nonchalant now. You're doing the pelvic floor physical therapy, you're facing your shit, like you've changed your whole life. And I just got so present being there for some reason. It just all dawned on me, and I was like, oh my God, I'm free. I realized that freedom was a choice at that moment. It was like, you've always been free, Meredith. You've just been, you've been the master, you've been the slave, you've been everything. You've always been there. You just didn't let yourself out of that prison. And it was this whole like, just wave of like getting present basically had me realize what I had actually done in my life. And I still had other obstacles to overcome, but basically the realization of me achieving what I thought was impossible was what led me to that becoming free moment, that like when you taste that, when you realize that it's all within you, and how much crap you gave, power you gave to diseases, to other people, to whatever, you never want to go back. Like you never want to trade that for anything ever again. So that, I would say, is when I began to start protecting and honoring my body, myself, because I saw everything that I had done and I got present to it. And it's basically like looking in the mirror, but most people don't stop long enough and look in the mirror emotionally.
Yeah.
You know? So it sounds simple, but it was very profound.
I can imagine, like I can feel that it was a profound experience. And one of the things that caught my attention, I mean, it resonates so strongly, and I agree that freedom is a choice. And at the same time, I've also had moments in my life where I was experiencing a lot of pain or sadness or frustration or confusion or anything else. And when people would tell me that freedom is a choice or happiness is a choice, it would fucking piss me off. So
Yeah.
I also just want to acknowledge that like,
Yes.
and yeah. Well, what's your response to that? Like, particularly for someone that may be listening who's experiencing a ton of pain right now, and then they hear someone just say like, yeah, but that's a choice. Like, what do you want to say to those people?
Totally. Oh, totally understand. So like I said before, pain is inevitable, totally inevitable. Suffering is optional. And like I said, we suffer when we don't meet our pain, and we don't sit and listen, and we suffer. That's that freedom part. When I say freedom is a choice, it's something that's discovered. It's claimed within yourself. It is going through the healing journey. Inevitably, you will find that. And then you'll say, of course, freedom is a choice, but it's an awareness level thing. I am not saying at all that pain doesn't exist and all this other crap. No, it absolutely does exist for a very good reason, to lead you to that, to lead you to discovering that you are always free. We're so free. One of my favorite quotes is, "You're so free, you can choose bondage." And a lot of people do.
Wow, that's a really beautiful quote.
Yeah. That's I think it's Abraham Hicks, but yeah, it's realizing that sometimes we need to choose to be a slave. Sometimes we need to choose to not be free, because it gives us contrast to understand like what we're even going through.
Close the door to keep the animals out.
Oh,
I'm just thinking about this, everything you're saying. The way I've started to view it is, you said earlier, like, pain, I became friends with my pain, and
yeah.
that's something that it's definitely shifted in my experience of pain over the last 2 years. And now I often share this with people. Whenever I notice like a part of myself, a tendency or habit or an emotional, wound, you could say, that's painful, I imagine them as different like friends sitting at the bar with me at my favorite bar. It's just like a rural Wisconsin dive bar. And I just want to sit down with them. I want to order them their favorite drink. And I just want to say like, hey, what's going on?
Wow.
What do you need? What do you want to tell me? What do you want me to know that I haven't been listening to?
Yeah.
And I spent most of my life doing the opposite, treating my pain as if it was an immature child that needed to go sit in the corner and learn to stop being so dramatic, and like, you need to grow up, you need to get over yourself, you need to think about other people who are more important than you. And I think that right there, like the aversion to pain, the inclination to avoid it, is the problem. And the moment that we just stop avoiding it is the moment that we get to discover all of those things that it's been trying to tell us the whole time in this very loyal way. I love that you use the word loyal. I've never thought about it in those terms before. And so now when I like notice pain, I see it as like they're like treasure chests. And if I can get up close enough to it to like touch it and not be afraid of it, then I can open it and find out that there's some awesome treasure inside. But it requires touching it and feeling the pain.
It does. That's so beautifully said. It does require touching it. And we live in such an escapist society full of coping mechanisms and everything to avoid feeling, to avoid. It says, like you said, that little child in the corner, like, no, get over there. Like, no one wants to see you. Here, take this ibuprofen, Lortab, whatever. And I'm not saying don't do that. You do whatever you need to do to get through so you can see the treasure chest. It's like,
Hell yeah.
no one gets there like immediately. But when you get to the point where you can actually reach that threshold of feeling the full amount of whatever it's trying to tell you and surrendering to that and really listening. And there's so many messages that I still get, you know, if I have cramps 1 month, or I get messages in my menstrual cycle anyway, because it's actually the most psychic time, because your left and right brain, the hemispheres of your left and right brain are more communicative than any other time. The month is during the menstrual cycle. So you're getting messages of like what to let go of, what you need to continue the next cycle forward. Like, and if you're not there to listen to that, then you're just moving forward with a bunch of crap over and over and over. So it's totally in our best interest to not do the coping mechanisms. And like I said, do whatever you need to do, but to also, you know, if you need to do something like that, also have it as a priority to sit down, like you said, and have dinner or lunch with your pain and get to know it a little bit, you know?
Yeah. My experience has been that, like this moment that you described on your bed where you really discovered and experienced freedom. My experience has been that those moments can arise where we're totally open and we have some insight, but they're very difficult to stay in, because then life gets hard again and we get distracted again and something painful happens again, and now we have to pay a bill, and now someone needs our help, and all these different things. And for me, it's like these moments of these milestones of like realizing something really profound that we didn't realize before are pivotal. And at the same time, we now have like a new habit to build. And habits aren't something that are built like in one moment. And so I'm curious, what has been helpful for you to just like build this habit of tapping into this freedom that you experienced that day?
Absolutely. So that's actually part of why I decided to explore this journey of healing endometriosis and my pain over the last 17 years through my art, to basically have it become my sacred practice where, you know, every month I'm making art, living the phases. The art is like what is representing those particular, you know, phases happening in the body. So that is definitely one of the things that I incorporated as a practice to not only remember the freedom, but, you know, how I support my body in that and how I live in those cycles, and honoring like myself, honoring my needs, those different needs through each of those cycles, which to me, that's freedom. When you can just be who you are, that's really what freedom is to me, when you actually can see yourself, when you can claim yourself. And it's amazing. And it is absolutely, you're absolutely right. It's something that that happens, and then, you know, other shit comes at you, and like someone cuts you off in traffic, or, you know, you get in a fight with your family. So it's a constant practice. And I will also say boundaries. So that's a whole other piece that I haven't even talked about. But as far as like emotional health, that is something that keeps me very close to my freedom, is boundaries. And I know that may sound kind of weird, but boundaries aren't a fence to keep you away from other people or separated. They actually bring you closer to other people because you're knowing yourself. Therefore, you're tying in closer to the intimacy of other people. And that's more of like on the spiritual level, as in all is one. But boundaries are huge. They're everything. They're for you too. They're not for like you to be like, you can't behave this way or you can't say that. It's what you're doing. It's I'm choosing to do this when you raise your voice. Like it's not controlling other people. It's honoring what you need, and it's who you are. And it's also like what you say yes to, you know, like if you like the color purple, that's a boundary. That's part of you. It's part of what separates you and makes you that unique version of Vicky or Meredith, you know, that separates us all out from the oneness. But we are all, in fact, one. But that's why, like, when people get to know God, when they get to know spirit, source, the universe, they go inside because they got to know themselves. So it connects them to the greater source and the connectedness of all things. So boundaries for sure keeps me close to freedom.
It's really profound what you're saying. And I really want to ask more about it because it's something that I'm struggling with right now personally. Is I think over the last year or two, I've really for the first time been like intentional about noticing my boundaries and upholding my boundaries and like honoring my boundaries. And I'm very glad about that. I'm very grateful that I'm doing that now. It's helpful for me for sure. And I feel like a little bit like a toddler learning how to walk, and I keep like stumbling. And the what I want to say is like a side effect, but I don't really think it's a side effect. I think it's all part of the same thing. What I'm going through right now is part of creating boundaries has led to this experience of being disconnected from other people.
Mm-hmm.
And that becomes problematic at some point. Like I crave and I need and I want more human connection in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to protect myself and uphold my boundaries at the same time.
Yeah.
And it's a struggle to figure out how to do both. What advice do you have for me?
Totally. I love this. I love it so much. So they're not like in opposition. They actually are working together. Boundaries and the people that you want connected with. When you have boundaries and you know who you are and you start asserting those boundaries, you will attract those people that you want that connectedness with, if that makes sense. So for instance, but I also do understand, and this is something, in no way am I speaking to you or anyone on a pedestal at all. It is 100% practice for me as well, but I'm just sharing my experience because I've had a lot of like narcissistic interactions, narcissistic family members, struggled with codependency. So that is all within that boundary conversation. You cannot, a narcissist or someone that is basically going on the outside to get something that they don't have within themselves, so like emotionally leeching off of other people, it is impossible to do that with someone that has boundaries, healthy boundaries. So in saying that, basically, the more that you know yourself and the more that you're like, for instance, one of the things that a simple thing, like a simple boundary that I had. And the other thing is boundaries can change. They're not like these laws. You're not a slave to them. They grow and change as you grow and change. So I noticed like some of the things that weren't working for me in my life is I had an issue with people. I wasn't being seen or wasn't being heard. by some people in my life. And this will start to show itself when you start asserting boundaries. And I was being ghosted by people. So like people weren't texting me back, or I would just like not hear from them again. So one of the boundaries I had was, because I value communication and integrity in that, is that like people that don't text me back till like a month later, you know,
I'm
aren't,
so one of those people.
you know what I'm
Sorry,
saying?
all my friends.
No. And like I said, it depends on the person. Like I've known people, like I have a friend who is like that too, but it's like a different dynamic we have. So this is what I'm saying in the fluidity of boundaries. It's a different dynamic, but for the most part, to just give you an example, when I like assert this boundary and say like, hey, you know, I'd really like for you to respond back. Like when I talk to you, like I hang out with people that actually really care and want to like hang out with me. Usually if someone was like, dude, I'm so sorry, like I just have a million things going on, like they would assert that at that time. You know, like they would say like, it's a problem I'm working on. People that aren't interested in like what you really have going on, or like actually having some kind of resolution to this, aren't gonna respond really well. They're gonna be like, well, screw you. And that's fine. That's fine too. But I've noticed that instead of always being nice, and like that's also too like part of codependency, going along to get along, like, you know, not saying what I need. Like I need communication from the other side. Like I need to feel from my friends like I'm seen and I'm heard. We all need that. It's a very like, I crave intimacy, deep, intimate relationships. And it doesn't make another person bad or wrong if they don't. We're just at two different levels, where someone else may want like, you know, someone to party with and just hang out with once a year. I'm looking for other types of relationships. So that's an example of like a small example of a boundary, you know. So I hope that helped. Did that help?
It does. Well, I mean, it's just kind of slowly sinking into my body that boundaries don't actually separate us, that they actually bring us closer to ourselves and to others. It's really beautiful description that I've never thought of in that way before.
Yeah. You know, just telling the truth. That was another boundary that I had early on. Like people that tell me one thing and then they act in a completely different way. It's not like me telling them you can't do that, but it tells me it's my reaction. It's like, okay, I am now knowing that I'm not going to get honesty, like one of my true needs, from this person. It's like going to the hardware store to get milk. So like you're not going to get it there. So I would say the foundation of boundaries starts with like knowing what you really need, what you really care about, and not being afraid to just say that. And yeah, at the beginning, a lot of people will probably leave because you may have just been in relationships where you thought you were exchanging one thing, but really it's a whole other thing going on, a whole other, you know, loosh fest, or, you know, whatever you want to call it. But yeah, once you start doing that, my life like completely changed. And I lost a lot of people in my life, but they were people that I learned that weren't there for me anyway. So it was just cleaning it up. And then I attracted people that were in support and in alignment with where I wanted to go, which was intimate, deep relationships, honesty, integrity, things like that, you know?
So what role has art played in this process of healing and honoring yourself?
So art has been huge in healing and honoring myself. It's how I first started art to heal myself, actually. I was a dancer for a long time, a ballerina, and that this was even through endometriosis. But also I had a really bad eating disorder because I had never addressed the sexual trauma until later on when I started healing endo and everything. So I first began visual art healing that, and I was just in the in the trenches, in the shitter with that, like deep in depression, suicidal. And I just heard this voice one day that was like, draw, just draw. And I did. I started it. I started drawing, and I could somehow, and it started coming to me very naturally. And that's when that was around 17 years old. And I wasn't really supposed to go to college. Like, I was just trying to survive, like, out of high school. Like, I was like, my parents were like, oh my God, let's like one day at a time. So I started art through that, and I just dove in, and it was the only thing. It led me to getting a scholarship to SCAD through drawing. I found photography, which I loved. I made my own pinhole cameras. My high school had a dark room. So I loved like the light and the shadow, and how you can only see the shadow because of the light, and vice versa. And that contrast in life that I also experienced emotionally. You know, you can only know what you want because you know what you don't want because of the pain. So it gives you a basis for understanding. So I became really fascinated with that idea.
What I hear you saying when you describe that is like art provided this safe environment, or not like a physical place, but a safe opportunity to reflect on your own pain.
100,000%. It was safe because there was no rules in art. So that's what I loved about creation. There's no rules. There's no, it can be anything. It can be anything that you want. It's not, some people, you get into higher art and people say this is bad art, this is good art, but it's all art. It's wild and untamed, and everything is possible in art. Healing, everything. It's a whole world. You can create it. That was huge.
What does authenticity have to do with healing?
So, a whole lot. I would say you can only heal once you have been authentic. It begins there. It begins with authenticity. It begins with you facing yourself, facing your shit, facing your pain, facing who you are. You have to face whatever the issue is instead of escaping and denying, like what we were talking about earlier, through coping mechanisms, through name whatever. We live in an escapist society, which is actually Luciferian ideology. But authenticity and healing, it starts there. It starts with facing it. In order to be authentic, you have to face who you are. And then you can actually begin to heal, because you're actually looking at the problem, and you're actually, or it may not even be a problem. You're looking at what is. You're looking at the message, and you're listening.
As I'm listening to you, well, first of all, I just want to say, I wouldn't think of myself as an artist. I think that recently, within the last 2 years, I've decided that I aspire to be an artist. So I'm just, it's fun. And so I'm learning about this artistic experience and process. And what's coming to mind right now is that there's like 3 different aspects. There's the part of like inner noticing, like willingness to look at your own pain or your own experience or whatever it is. And then there's this part of creating something out of it. And then there's this part of sharing that with the world. And it's almost like so it's like the inner part of noticing, and then this process of like bringing the inner to some kind of outer manifestation. And then the step of like allowing that outer manifestation to be shared with others. I'm very curious about all 3 of those steps. But the first one, the part about just facing your shit, which I love the title of your work. So fantastic. We've talked a little bit about that. The process of actually like bringing that inner experience into some kind of outer manifestation is something that is new to me. And I got inspired by it. I think I've mentioned this several times on my podcast, but I got inspired by it about this time last year, I think it was, when I had a lot of anger, and I really wanted to, yeah, it was just very like conflict-oriented emotions that I wanted to, I don't know what I wanted to do. I probably shouldn't say out loud what I wanted to do.
That's
But
okay.
but then I listened to this Lex Freeman's podcast with Magat Wade, and she talked about criticize through creating.
Okay.
And if there's something that you think is messed up, this was my takeaway. I don't know if it's fair paraphrasing, but it's something that you think's messed up. Like, instead of just sitting around criticizing it, go create something better.
Yep.
And
Yeah.
so somehow it just hit me like, a bolt of lightning or something. And I was like, okay, all this shit that I'm pissed off about, I just need to go create something I think is better. And so I started creating, just not like anything in particular, but just like creating, just like ideas even that I thought were better than these other ideas. And I was so blown away by just the experience that I had like in my own body whenever I would create. It was like, oh, I'm giving birth to something new. And I'm like bringing new life into the world from something that was very destructive and very painful and very bad in my eyes or my view. And now I'm like transforming it into something totally else that's inspiring and authentic and life-giving. And I couldn't believe it. I was like, how come no one told me this before?
Yeah, exactly. I love what you said. It's so true. It's those parts that we are like, we don't want anyone else to see, or that we bulldoze, or that are seem really ugly and bad, like our pain and our depression and our anxiety and our stress. Those are all parts that are like, they are the good parts too. They just have a message. They have something that you're not listening to, or something that hasn't been seen, it hasn't been heard. So it's like, that's why I feel like art is that like catalyst for really even learning sometimes what it is that is in there. It can be a way of discovering like what those parts are trying to tell you, like those parts that seem bad. It's like, once we are quote unquote healed, we realize that they were always there. They were always like the masters. They were always like the really good feelings. They were just in disguise. They were just
And they were trying to help us the whole time.
They were trying to
feel
help
more
us.
alive.
Totally. And it's through art you can really begin to see that and personify these abstract ideas and these emotions and everything. It's a way of working through our own emotions, our own memory, our own like message and expression of what we've learned. And, sharing that, like how you were saying before, is another step of that.
Yeah. So this stuff, like, I feel like I don't know a whole lot about, but like, what happens? Well, let me ask you this first. Do you make art that you decide not to share with the world?
Yeah, I do.
How do you decide what to share and what not to share?
So it took a while, and this is again a journey, and there may be different points on the journey where you're like, I'm sharing everything that I'm doing. And this also gets into the conversation of doing art as a job versus like as a career versus just making art, right? Like for fun. And so something that I have learned, first of all, have you read The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron? So
no.
good. Oh my gosh. It's
Add to the list.
You should. It has changed my life. Holy shit.
I will say that Rick Rubin's The Creative Act, which I have right in front of me, has changed my life.
Another good one. That's another good one. I feel like he got a lot from Julia Cameron.
I believe it.
Oh man, it's like a creative workbook. But in there is something that she talks about where it's like, you have to create art. When you create just because you have a client or a project, then it becomes a job. It's like having sex just to make a baby is what she says. Like,
Sounds awful.
do you see? So that's a good way, like, analogy for describing when you're just making art just because it's a job or just to have a post or just to like share or whatever. Like, it's not just about that. In my opinion, yeah, it should really be coming from you, unless it is your job, unless like you really want it to be like this job. But if you're looking to really heal and get something really deep in that juicy goodness out of like the creative process, you're not gonna want to just have sex to make a baby. You're gonna want to like really get into it. So it's gonna need to like not have sales and clients and what's hot right now and trends and all of that as a part of your creative process. That's a part of building a brand. That's a part of, you know, making marketing assets and stuff, possibly. But I think I wanted to say that because it's a distinction that, and I myself have let those lines be blurred, and you can get into, you know, a creative depression. You can get into, you know, not having anything to create and being completely blank because you're not pulling down from the well of creativity. You're going out here to everything else and saying like, well, what's this person going to say? Or is this person going to buy it? Or what are they going to think? And you're looking at everyone else's opinions instead of going within and saying, what's really speaking to me right now that wants to come through? So I know I kind of went off on a tangent on that one. But
It's a very interesting and relevant tangent. And I'm very curious, like, how do you manage this balance of authenticity and building a business or generating income?
Right. Great question. Awesome question. It's an ongoing conversation, needs to be a bigger conversation in art. It's something that I definitely talk about, and I'll be talking more about it in things that I do. It really depends on the person. It depends on who you are. You know, what's true for one person may not be true for another person. So I think, though, maintaining authenticity as an artist begins with having your personal practice. In my opinion, for me, having those pieces that, or a practice of some kind, like whether it be writing or sketching or whatever, that's like you marinating, that's like you tapping into the well, right? And then you may create a piece, right, and share it and sell it and stuff. But there's this ongoing conversation that you're having with creator, with the ultimate artist, right? The universe. There's an ongoing dance always. And cultivating that, that's how I see maintaining authenticity and then still having a business. I think that, you know, they go hand in hand. And now I will say, I say that, and then I'm like, you know, I've been in integrity, some of the highest points of integrity in my life, and had the lowest amount of sales. So a part of it too, it's very true. So I don't like when people are like, just be who you are, it's all going to work out, follow your joy and you'll have millions of dollars. No, not necessarily, especially not in art when it's, and that speaks to a conversation about our world and, you know, thought-provoking art versus like something with no point of view, like, you know, babies and abstracts and florals and all of that. Nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that. But I'm talking, if you're creating like thought-provoking, like I healed my endometriosis pain, and I want to share that with the world, it's a little bit different of a conversation, and you have to really understand the calling. Like, and I'm speaking for myself, it's a calling. I put the art first always, and I made that decision. That's why I have other sources of income, like a job, because I'm not always going to ask my art to pay the mortgage, to pay the grocery bills, because I love it. I love it so much that I don't want to ask it to do that. But because of the world we live in where money is required for everything, something needs to do that so that I can maintain my sacred practice for myself and share this higher mission and this higher purpose. I do believe that it will become married one day. But like I said, it's a journey. It doesn't always mean, just because you're being authentic does not always mean that you're going to have success in business and all of that, because the marketplace may not be ready for that. If you look at the world we live in, which most of the world is scared to face themselves, their thoughts, their feelings and emotions, when we're talking about healing and facing your shit and some other pretty radical, intimate things, it's not necessarily about high sales. It's about connecting with other people.
Yeah. Wow. I want to ask, there was something that I had read. Oh, what's your approach to building relationships with your collectors and the people that you rely on for generating income?
So my approach to like cultivating those relationships, is that what you're asking? Sorry.
Yeah. I think this was a question that I had seen in your kit.
Oh, was it? Oh, Lord. Oh, Lord.
You can just skip it if you want.
My approach to generating relationships with collectors. So my approach generating relationships with collectors is just to be who I am, is really my approach. And I will say something I like to say a lot, and a lot of people say this. The best marketing strategy is just telling the truth.
Oh my gosh, I love that so much. It's so good. I have really strong opinions about marketing, and that I think most people are doing it completely wrong. And I think you just hit the nail on the head. Why and what the point is and should be.
Yeah. And that goes back to being authentic. So the more true, the more authentic, like the more you tell the truth about who you are, what you stand for, what you don't stand for, you inherently you're taking a stance, you're having a point of view. So inherently you're going to attract people that are like totally in alignment and getting something out of that. And you're also going to attract people that don't like that at all, because you're being you, like you're having a point of view, you're taking a stance. So there's always going to be that contrast. And a lot of people are scared to have that stance. They're, busy trying to be politically correct and trying to like please everyone. And that goes into like codependency and other things. That's kind of the world we live in, where everyone's just trying to like seem nice and happy and stuff all the time in their marketing, rather than like sharing with people like, this is what I'm going through, or this is what I, have been thinking about lately. And, the more vulnerable I think that we are in our marketing and our art, and the more real, that's what people really connect to. They don't care. Everyone knows like the Christmas cards and the like Halloween parties or whatever, but no one is just sitting around saying like, I'm really grateful for how grounded and safe you made me feel in this conversation. No one's like taking the time to actually like see each other and appreciate that. But it's like practice. And the more we do that, I think that is like the new wave and like the new approach to marketing and business.
I couldn't agree more. Everyone is craving authenticity.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
And if they're not, I can't even imagine how boring their life is.
They're scared. If they're not, they're scared of what they're going to see, is what it is. But yeah.
Which is reasonable. I mean, I've had plenty of fear of my own authenticity, and I can relate to that too.
Yeah, absolutely.
What is a commonly held belief about creativity that you passionately disagree with?
Okay. A commonly held belief about creativity I passionately disagree with is that you are just born an artist. That some people have it, some people are creative, other people aren't. Every single person is born from creation, is a part of creation. Everyone inherently is creation. Like, you have it, you are it. Like, it's just various forms of expression. It's not just like creating art. Creativity could be like resourcefulness and solving problems. Creativity is like new ways of looking at issues. It's creation. It's like, it's what's new and free. So
I love how much you use the word free.
yeah, the best things are free, really and truly.
When you first started, so was photography your first professional foray into art?
Yes. Well, I would say like it started, like back in high school with drawing and painting, and that actually led me to photography. And then I really just blasted off with photography in the darkroom and old world processes, and I created my own process where I turned a scanner into a camera, challenging like the idea of what a camera even is, which is just really light and time. Yeah, it's because it's light and time. It's light passing through a hole for a certain amount of time. That's all photography is. So you can make a camera out of really anything, but just that like action, and then like the alchemy and the magic of the dark room and those old world processes where you get really intimate with the photos. That was like my roots. That was like everything. And then of course now you have like the digital dark room in Photoshop, totally different experience. But I really like merging the two. I used to be a total purist where I was like so pissed that everything had gone digital. And that's actually how I created that process where I was like, I'm going to make a mockery of digital photography. I'm going to turn a scanner into a camera. And it became this whole other world where I was like putting together pieces of people and pixels, and it was these life-size images because the scanner would like surmise a person into pixels. And so I was basically making a darkroom negative, like making the subject become the negative, which would be flattened in the darkroom, and then printing that and editing it digitally. So a lot of things in my life have started, and I think you even commented on that earlier where you were like, anger, like getting pissed or something has led you to other things. I mean, I would say like all the things in my life when I really started healing or really started making a change, like I reached a certain level of being really mad, of being really pissed off, where I'm just like, this is it. Like this, I'm done. Like it's like my line in the sand. Like I'm now, even this Every Phase series, I was pissed that Beeple had sold the world's most expensive NFT, and it was like 5,000. It was every days. And so we made a piece of art every day for 5,000 days, sold it. And I was like, I'm so fucking tired of like this every day. Like, gotta get everything done by the every day. Like, just more of the masculine, testosterone driven world that we live in. And that's why I was like, you know what? I'm going to make a piece. I'm going to make a series called Every Phase. It's the feminine answer. So a lot of my like work has been a response to something else, which is another something else that sparks creativity, is anger, is having that. You're having a response within yourself. Like you're wanting to say something, you're wanting to express something. It's like a new truth, you know?
That's beautiful. And I love I mean, even just using the word spark, it's like when I experience anger, it feels like fire. And it feels like, yeah, well, on the one hand, it's like destroying something. It's also transforming something into a totally different anything. And so I love you describing the way you were like making a mockery of these different mediums and then like mixing them and kind of turning them on their head to, I mean, in some ways, it's almost like you were making a mockery of your own view of them.
Yeah. Totally.
And then I see that you brought, I mean, I haven't like actually seen the augmented reality art that you do, but I see that you brought augmented reality into your art. And I want to hear more about just this choice that you make to mix all these things and turn them on their head. And what meaning does that have for you?
Yeah, I think it comes from, it's a mixture of things. So it comes from the idea of like not art for the sake of art and not taking things so seriously. but then at the same time it's that dance between like you're making a mockery of something, but then through doing that and not taking something so seriously, you're actually finding something actually kind of profound. You're actually finding something totally new because you just weren't afraid to be like, that's dumb. Like you're, you know, like you weren't afraid to be like, dude, when are we going to stop doing every days? Like, when are we going to get out of this? Like every day, like, so, and I think that like a lot of comedians and stuff find like these really actually wise, profound truths sometimes, like through even making jokes, through their stand-up and stuff. It's because you're just looking at something in like a much looser way, you know, I think is how that starts. You don't necessarily start as it being this really big cerebral. I mean, sometimes it totally can, but for me, those processes started, for me getting really mad. And then I'm wanting to have, okay, I'm pissed about this, but then I'm like, okay, let's have fun with it. And then it's like, oh, wow, this is actually, I'm actually learning about it because I'm decided to look at it and take a make a mockery of it. It's forcing me to actually look at it. And I'm like, holy shit, now I see why people like this. They're like,
oh man, that's so good. Yeah. That's so good. I feel like a reverence, and I mean that in the highest possible meaning of the word. I feel a reverence for comedy. I feel like it is so life-giving. It is so protective. It's so important, and it's so profound. And I've learned so much about life from comedy.
Yeah, it's true. And that is, I heard the other day, like your inner child, people doing like inner child work and stuff right now, is actually like that playfulness and that just like not taking things so seriously and just want to have fun is actually your higher self in disguise as a child, because both like wisdom and that like innocence at a certain point like meet because it's so close to the creator. And really these like truths that we like overthink and judge other people and all this other crap, like in the bigger picture of things, so many things that we worry about on a day-to-day are so petty. Like, it's crazy. And I'm not diminishing anyone's pain or anything anyone's going through, but when we just like allow ourselves to like zoom out for a second, it's pretty funny. It can become funny, and it's very healing because it's true. Both things can be true. You can be going through a lot of pain and it's really shitty, and then you can zoom out and realize that like it all comes out in the wash and we're just like one little speck like in this entire galaxy. And like, I don't know, sometimes I imagine that like I'm gonna wake up like in a pod and everything in my life that I've experienced up until now is just like one dream. Like, and it's like thinking about things like that, creativity, like playfully, it's just, it takes the edge off. And it's true, you know, and it all comes out in the wash eventually.
Beautifully said. What's something that you would call a major failure that you've learned a lot from?
Oh, wow. I've learned from so many failures. I've had a lot of failures, especially in business. It's definitely necessary though. I'm not saying that to like diminish myself in any way or whatever. It's necessary for growth to fail 100%. And in creativity, in art practices, like it's how you learn things not working out, which then reveals how they do work out. When you're like, oh, I did this and it didn't, you're like that much sharper to figuring out how it actually works. So I would say I experienced it by proxy, but it goes along with my other failures in business that I was talking about. I would say my husband owned a business, and this was early on, and he essentially, long story short, is a toxic relationship with his business partner, and he went bankrupt. And this guy had like lied about everything. We lost everything. We couldn't afford to live anywhere, so we were basically homeless. We
Wow.
asked my our friend at the time, who we basically didn't ask, we had to beg, because it wasn't, I don't know, there was something going on with her and him at the time, and she wasn't really wanting us to necessarily live there, but we worked it out. We worked out a deal with her basically, and we couldn't pay her, but she let us stay there in an extra room that she had. And so I would say that experience, this is another example of pain leading to purpose and greater things like freedom. It was so painful that I was like forced to really look at what is working, what isn't working. Like, my husband was super depressed about everything that had happened. So I was really the one to drive this car forward and get us out of this hole that we were in financially. So I stepped up to the plate, and I discovered personal development. I discovered entrepreneurship. I discovered a lot of the things I'm talking about right now. And this was definitely way before I healed I was still going through endometriosis and all of that. But I started really looking at myself as very, very beginning, and started doing classes and things like that, and learning about boundaries and learning about relationships and learning about, business and discipline and all of those things that are kind of in the personal development world. And that could be a whole other episode, because there's tons of issues with that world too. But it was a catalyst for getting me out of that black hole, basically. And so, I worked my ass off, and I did what I needed to do. And we're here now. We're about to sell our house. We're about to move. There's things I look around today, and it's like that moment on the bed where I'm like, holy crap. Like, after having nothing, you just get present, and you just take a second to get present to everything that you have now. It's so beautiful. And we don't take the time to do that. Even if you haven't gone through something like as catastrophic as that, there's like little things all the time that we're like, look at this huge thing that you actually just did. That it's like, because we're so like, okay, on to the next thing. Okay, now we're not homeless. Okay, well, how do we pay the rent? It's like, so it's never like recognizing, look at where you are. Like, look at what you've achieved. Celebrate. So I'm working on celebrating and having fun and being grateful for like the things that I've done, and really reflecting and looking at like, look at what you've done. Be here now. Be present with it, instead of just like, okay, I've done this. Now I'm going on to the next thing, and just like living in the future,
Beautiful. It's definitely something I need to I want to be more intentional about, celebrating success and just celebrating life. What would you say for someone that is in the middle of what feels like their biggest life failure? What's one question they could ask themselves that might be helpful?
If you're in the middle of your biggest failure, one question you could ask yourself. That's such a good question. One question you could ask yourself is like, I could just start really basic. Like, who am I? Like,
you started with the hardest question.
Like, who am I? I know that may be like kind of depressing. Scratch that. Who am I? But
That's
think
a really
about
good
it.
question.
You know what I mean? It's like, who are you? Like, what do you stand for? What are your yeses? What are your nos? Like, those are the boundaries that you have. Like, who are you? What are your likes? What are your dislikes? What are your needs? So I would say someone that's going through failure, looking at what it is that you need. And maybe that's the question. What do I need? What do I need? You know, like having your own back in that way, where it's not like, you know, the child that you're trying to scorn. It's like you're literally your own child. Like you can imagine it that way, as like your failure or whatever, as like this child that you're helping cultivate and develop. And it's like, what do you need? Sitting down with it, really getting to know it, because that's where your success is. It's just in disguise, really, as a failure. Don't you think?
Yeah, totally. I found it very helpful recently in regards to this. I really appreciate that you came to this question, what do you need? It's the main question that I work with my clients on. And I, you know, my opinion, I think I stated earlier, is like any unpleasant experience we're having, I don't want to speak to the physical level because I just feel like I don't have enough life experience with it. But on the emotional level, I have a lot of life experience. And I feel like any emotional pain we're experiencing is simply an indication that we have some need that's not being met. And I know and it seems like many other people, have some kind of like habit of denying our own needs. And like for some reason, not even wanting to acknowledge that we have needs, because somehow we're like needy if we have needs. And I started thinking about this one day in terms of plants. I'm like, okay, if you see a plant that's like wilting and falling over and drying up, you don't think like, oh, that plant's so needy. I feel like, fuck, it fucking needs water. It's okay to need water. And I try to view myself like as a plant. It's like, okay, this is not like, there's no need for judgment around whatever the need is. It's like, if my body, and for me, it's like the body's the easy starting point. And then if, you know, you want to tie in other ideas about the mind or the soul or the spirit or whatever else, I think that can be very profound. And I enjoy doing that, but I don't think everyone enjoys doing that. If you just look at the body, it's like, okay, I have a human body and my human body has needs. And as an adult, there's literally not a single other human on the planet who can meet the needs for this body. I'm the only one. I'm the only one whose job it is. And if I don't do it, that means that this body called Vicky is not going to have its needs met.
Mm-hmm.
And whose fault is that? It's like, all because I didn't want to acknowledge that my plant was like wilting and needed water. It's like, why would I not want to acknowledge that I need water? I'll tell you this, still to this day, this is the biggest, I'm going to reveal my most embarrassing fact right now. And like, the thing that I am struggling the most with is remembering to eat.
Wow.
And I find this like kind of hilarious and very embarrassing that like the most basic human need and activity is something that for some reason I still avoid doing. And I know, I mean, it's all related to like stress and self-judgment and all this kind of stuff. And I'm aware of that and I'm working on it. But to me, it's just it's like, how crazy is that my own self-judgment is like preventing me from giving my body the most basic things that it needs to survive. And I also noticed one day that every time like when I would need rest, I would need to lay down on the couch because I was tired, because my body was exhausted. I would immediately start judging myself. Oh, I need to be doing this. I need to be doing that, blah, blah, blah. And I would feel guilt and shame. It's like, wow, I feel guilty because my human body needs rest to survive. What kind of shit is that?
That shit, that's programming. That's from our society. That is programming. We all have it. And it's an undoing what we're doing right now. The programming of, it's that shadow, I call it shadow masculinity, where it's just all about production. You need to be going. It's about what you're producing, what's on the outside, what you have produced and worked for. And like, what are you doing? What are you taking action on? Are you being a leader? Are you being active? Let's act. Overly like that. So when it comes to needs, like we need to reflect. Like, we need to rest. So things that challenge that like production oriented mindset are viewed as, oh, well, you need a rest. Like, that's so weak. Like, that's so, that's like a girl. Like, what are you? Like, that seriously, oh, you're a woman? Oh my God, you're a woman? Holy crap, you better hide that. No, but it's like, if you don't take the time, you need both. You need both the polarities, masculine, feminine, not just one. Like, if you don't take the time to rest and reflect and relax and you're just moving forward, like I said earlier, with a bunch of crap always. So it's like less efficient. To be a part of being productive is resting, like, and is doing what you need to do. But I totally relate, because that was the beginning of all my endo stuff, like having guilt and shame because I need, the hot water bottle, or I need painkillers, or I need whatever. No, you need that. You need that right now, because that's what your body, what is true for you. That's what you're going through. It doesn't mean anything. It's just like, that is what is occurring. That's the truth. So to deny your needs is actually like lying. It's lying to yourself and pretending to be like something you're not, because we've made it mean in this world that needing something means that you're weak, when it's actually totally the opposite. You only become strong from honoring your needs.
Yeah, beautifully said. You're reminding me, I appreciated you brought up, this whole phenomenon of political correctness. And my meditation teacher had a beautiful term to describe political correctness. He called it socially expected dishonesty.
Oh, wow. Yes.
And when I hear you talk about this, like, pretending you don't have needs, that's socially expected dishonesty. It's just another form of political correctness.
Yeah, it's a way to just get people to lie and be okay with lying consistently. And it's a very subtle programming that happens. It's very covert. It's not like anyone's just saying, just go out and lie to people. It's disguised as, well, you're being nice to others by not saying what you need. You're being nice to others when you don't be who you are so much, when you're not as authentic. Like, it's ridiculous. So it's completely the opposite. And it takes these conversations and this kind of like undoing, which you're seeing happen more and more and more, because people are realizing it doesn't work. Yeah. Like, the lie doesn't work. It's built on it's a house of cards, and it just just falls down because it's built on nothing. It's built on a lie. And you eventually will have to come back to the truth sooner or later.
Yes. And another thing that I find endlessly reassuring is that the truth is always there. Like, you're never gonna like lose the opportunity to come back to the truth. Yeah. Now, I think coming to the truth is much easier and more likely and more possible when you have certain conditions, and it could be very effective to focus on creating the conditions. But at the same time, it's like sometimes I don't think I do anymore. I think I used to like panic that I was going to miss the chance to find the truth. But like, there's no missing the chance. It's always there.
It's always there. That's a beautiful part. And I write about that a lot in my work. And a lot of my artwork centers around, the path of true freedom and the truth, really, and what that even means. And yeah, it's always, that's the power that lies kind of ride on. Like, they ride that wave of that everlastingness of the truth. That's why, like, the best lies are the closest to the truth, because it can stay there for a long time. Because you're right, the truth, it's just what is. It's always going to remain. When all the lies fall away and everything, that the truth is still going to be there. So that programming, those lies that are so close to the truth but just a little bit distorted or tweaked, are what stay around like the longest, you know?
Yeah. Wow. I really want to hear a little bit more about how can sex be used to heal pain?
Oh, yeah. Wonderful question. So there's a lot of different resources that I incorporated into helping me with my pain in regards to sex. One of them was pelvic floor physical therapy. If you are someone that has pain with sex, and that's on a physical level. There's an emotional level too, but like I said, they go hand in hand. So I would definitely, anyone that has pain with sex, I would 100%, recommend seeking out pelvic floor physical therapy and seeking out someone that specializes with muscles in that area, because it can have such a profound impact. And sometimes it is as simple as some people just carry stress in that area. Like some people carry stress in their shoulders, your legs, whatever. Sometimes it's in your pelvic floor, and it can cause pain. And then you're judging yourself and you're like, I'm made this way. Like, why am I not working? Like, I'm broken. It challenges and questions your entire identity because it's like your genitals. So I would definitely start with that because it's something that can have like an immediate effect, a very quick effect. So like pelvic floor physical therapy. And then on an emotional level, that part I definitely did in the group environment. When I talked a little bit earlier about having pain with sex, and my own pain came from not only my pelvic floor, but also the sexual trauma I experienced. And undoing those knots, I realized through group therapy, a lot of it, and this is a lot of people too, is what we were talking about earlier, that programming, and that programming, especially women, to just be pleasers and be codependent. Like, we're born into it. We can't even beat ourselves up. Like, how did I become this way? We are born into that kind of society. It's like, no, bulldoze your own needs. Like, no, be politically correct and just have convenient or societally accepted lying. We're born into it. So what happened with my sexual abuse is I basically started to think that I was just really messed up, that, I had pain down there and I wasn't ever supposed to, that I was broken, that, I had like thoughts that, I would only be able to have an orgasm or something if I was raped, if I had more sexual abuse. And it's actually very common with people that have had trauma. And basically when I sat and I analyzed it and I really sat with it, and I'm putting it all in a nutshell because I was doing a lot of group therapy at the time too, I realized that those parts of me and those things that I was like, holy crap, Meredith, this is like pain and destruction and people killing each other. Like, this is like really fucked up, like in your head. I realized that those parts were screaming out to be free. That the reason that I was having those kinds of thoughts, or they were connected to this non-concordance in my body of being attracted to something on a biological level, but not on a mental level, which happens a lot with women. Men are not so much that way. It still can happen, but women a lot, it's mental. They have to be mentally stimulated. So that's why you do see sometimes with rape, with abuse, people can still have orgasm stuff, because it's completely biological response. It is not happening here, or emotionally. So those things can be separated with women. Yeah. And when I sat and looked why those thoughts were happening for me, it was because they were so heinous. Some of those things were so heinous and so wild, but at least they were free in my mind. That because it took something like how I said earlier, that art has no rules and everything. Those parts were really screaming out for me to just allow myself to be me. And it's not even that I was like attracted to those things necessarily, and all of those things started to just fade away once I actually got that those parts were screaming out for freedom, for basically that, they were so heinous and so rejected by society and other people that, look, I can do this and still be free, kind of thing. Just like how in art there are no rules. So it became, I realized that there was nothing necessarily wrong with me. There was nothing like, I'm not a rapist. I'm not attracted to, people killing each other and sexual abuse and even BDSM, stuff like that. That wasn't what was going on. It was that I had parts that I was so afraid to look at that they were screaming out in these heinous ways. So I think that happens with a lot of people that are sexually abused or have trauma, and they are so embarrassed to share that. And so I totally understand, and are so like, they don't know what's going on and they think that like they're just fucked up. But it's actually your healing in disguise. Like, that's how it was for me. Like, those parts were actually like, I started looking into Taoist and the healing love, and how you can actually, in tantric practices and sex, took on a whole other meaning for me, where it basically, in regards to pain, it's not, like how much it hurts. The way I got past it was focusing on what feels good and getting into your body instead of up here all the time, which that's where, they program people with porn, they program people with all of this other shit, instead of allowing someone to bloom and develop and get to know themselves, really. So we as women especially, and men too, are totally programmed by porn, have to undo a lot of that. And so once I was able to kind of just like not pay attention to that so much and get more in my body with some of the Taoist practices and some of the tantric practices, sex became very spiritual. It became connected with love. And the Taoists, they talk about the healing love. You can actually age regress. You can actually heal portions of your body. And so but it is a step ladder there. So I still had pain. And even to this day, I still may have like a little pain at the beginning. And then I basically focus on what is feeling good. And instead of, oh my gosh, the pain's there, I need to take away this pain, I'm focusing on, okay, where is everything at and what is actually feeling good? And when I focus on that, the pain starts to go away, because it's a learned behavior.
How do you do that without like avoiding the pain? Because it seems like a slippery slope.
So you're not necessarily avoiding it. It's still there.
And you allow it to be there.
Exactly. Both can be there. And that's something that I left out. It's not saying this is bad, but by allowing it to be there and having that be okay, and not be being so focused on it going away, taking that resistance away allows it to just kind of dwindle away. So you focus more on like what feels good, right? And so you're kind of giving up that struggle, but you're keeping the desire. So you're giving up resisting having something change and saying, that's fine, you can be there, but this is there too, and I'm not looking at it. And when we're in pain, we tend to just only look at that. And especially in regards to sex, there's a lot of other things happening. The connection you have with your partner, the connection you have with your own body. There's other levels that society has just horrifically hidden by design. Really, really powerful manifestation techniques and healing techniques through sexual practice, but not the kind of sex that we've been presented with in our society, which is just totally based in bulldozing and shadow masculinity, and totally like just screwing, pun intended. another person. So
That's really beautiful. I'm really struck by how, I mean, I don't think I've ever thought of it in this way. And not just in regards to sex, but in the experience of life as a whole, that we can both allow pain and choose to focus on what feels good.
yeah,
And that it's not either or. We can do both.
it's a practice. And unless someone has experienced the pain with sex, then it would make more sense what I'm saying, because a lot of it too is like overstimulation in the area, because there's so many nerves and so much feeling that sometimes what we experience as pain, it's like because we're processing it too fast. So like we just like slow down, and like I'm just like, and me and my partner knows what's going on. So I'm just like, okay, let me just like see where everything is. And it really just a lot of the time starts with just slowing down. Then I'm like, oh, that was only painful because I was just experiencing it too fast. You know what I mean?
That's fascinating. I think that probably hits the nail on the head of exactly what I'm practicing right now, both with myself and my clients, is just slowing down enough for whether it's me or someone else to feel their own pain. And every time that I do it, whether for myself or with someone else, every time it's like once you slow down enough to experience your own pain, there's this discovery that happens that feels like life. It's the best word that I can come up with. Like, it feels like relief. It feels like freedom. Feels like insight, clarity, and it just feels like life. We have more life once we allow our pain.
Absolutely. Totally, because it's part of you. So you're connecting to self more when you connect to your pain.
Okay, I'm going to ask you a few questions in closing.
Yeah.
What's one thing that you wish for your younger self to know?
I wish it goes along with slowing down. I wish I would have, and again, it's all perfect. Don't have any regrets, but I wish I would have enjoyed the journey more. I wish I would have enjoyed it. I wish I would have taken the time and not been so focused on like, okay, I got this therapy down, I'm gonna go to the next thing. I'm gonna do the next thing, and so focused on that destination of healing, all the richness and all the juice of the experience of going through it. That's what actually matters. And you don't actually really realize that until you get to that destination that you thought was a destination. And there's like, it's a never ending expansion. So like the better it gets, the better it gets. But once you realize it, then you're like, okay, you take the time to like enjoy on the journey. But yeah, I do wish that I would have slowed down a little bit and just appreciated more, just like that presentness, and enjoyed that journey more, recognized myself.
Beautiful. What have you learned about yourself in this conversation?
Oh, wow. I love that question. What have I learned about myself in this conversation? I've learned that sometimes I think that people don't necessarily understand what I'm saying. Like, it can be like, what? But I'm realizing that through this conversation and through your just discourse and awesomeness and hosting and providing this safe space, that I'm actually talking about things regardless of someone's experience, endo or sexual trauma or anything. The root of it is something everyone experiences, which is pain, which is not being seen, not being heard, completely bulldozed. Like, everyone will go through that. So, realizing that is a source of connection through people is something I've definitely come to in this conversation.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Any particular takeaway you want to leave people with for them to keep in mind?
For them to keep in mind, I would say have fun. Don't take shit so seriously. Bring more fun. Something I'm trying to do more. Um, through the pain, through whatever. I'm not saying shit doesn't hurt. I'm not saying any of that, but if we can just laugh even when we're going through the ringer, oh man, that's power. That's freedom.
Beautiful. Where can people find more about you and your work?
Yeah, so my website is just my name, meredithochoa.com. And through there, you can see the Every Phase series. You can have a podcast to Face Your Shit, Heal Yourself, and have a book as well, same title, which you can all access on there. And then my photo portfolio, you can access on there as well. So that's kind of like the hub of everything that I do. And then you can also subscribe to the series so you can see like the newest piece of each phase each month.
Very cool. Thank you for having the courage to find your own authenticity and to share it with all of us.
Thanks for having me. It's such a privilege. Thank you.